Welcome back. From the repatriation of the former Zambian president's body to the MK Party's Floyd Shivambu, who announced developments on his political future, the United States has also directly involved itself in the Israel-Iran conflict. Political analyst Musa Mdunge, fellow analyst Thobani Zikalala, and columnist Bhekisisa Mncube join us to discuss these and other big stories of the past week. A very good evening to all of you gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us. Perhaps, Musa, let's begin with you. I mean, we're seeing now the USA has entered itself into the Israel-Iran war. Was this expected?
Well, Katleho, with Donald Trump, you really can't say anything is expected. I think the man makes policy on the whim. But what was clear in this case is that he was clearly agitating towards taking action towards Iran, given really the conservative or the neoconservative hawks that surround his administration. Even though he was a man a few months before he entered power, was saying that he would be the man who stops wars in the Middle East, who stops the war between Russia and Ukraine, but now finds himself potentially at another war entering the American people in it. And it's going to be telling whether the American people will sway towards the president. The very fact that he has not sought congressional approval is quite telling, both of how he is dominating the Republican Party that currently controls both Congress as well as the Senate. But at the same end, it is a risk, because if this fails, if the Iranians retaliate in a manner that the American society deems to be one that gives them the PTSD of the Iraq War of the 2000s, then certainly this is a president who will lose control over Congress for a generation. And in many ways, it's going to be telling to see the Democratic response.
I mean, Thobani, Musa speaks about Donald Trump not sorting congressional approval. And this is not the first time we're seeing of a U.S. president going on his own accord. What does this tell us about the history of these world powers and the decisions that they make, especially at times such as these, and the impact thereof of the people of the USA themselves?
I think good evening to everyone and good evening to your viewers. I think in analyzing and thinking about the actions of America and whether or not this idea of seeking congressional support and things like that, it is an issue of that America and many of the superpowers in the world will always act in the interest of their imperial program of dominance and re-establishing themselves as powers of the world. I mean, we all know that however we may like or dislike Donald Trump, but we know one thing for sure, that in both of his terms, in particular this time, he has always been speaking about this idea of making borders separated. And of course, for some people, it simply means, it may simply be understood in the context of the internal politics of America. But in the broader sense, it must be understood as Trump seeking to re-establish USA as a key dominant as the leader of the world, and the only thing in that art. And if you look at the actions in terms of the Middle East and Iran, it is the continuance of that program that they have to come in and support their only big ally in the region, which is Israel, to make sure that the continuity of control of that region, right, through Israel, of course, and this is helped in the process of America. Whether or not democratic processes are followed, whether or not the law is followed, whether or not it has been a Democrat or a Republican at the helm of America, the problem has always been the same. Whether it is the smiling Obama or it is the conservative call the airhead Trump, or it is the gun-wielding George W. Bush, or it is the philanthropist Bill Clinton. The problem of America is the same. Continue to dominate and run the world. So if we don't understand their actions, I think, at least in that sense, that the problem of America is about control and dominance of the world. And they will do anything at any given time to make sure that this dominance is always restored. Whether or not they have to support genocidal states like like Israel, in their case of dominance of the Middle East, they will do it if as far as it supports their political and economic program of continuing to be an imperial power of the world. And I think if we understand it in that context, some of the things that worry us about or surprise us about the USA and their actions will not surprise us, at least if we continue to understand their political program in that space.
Bhekisisa, do you agree that in that program of the USA wanting to be the leaders of the world, we shouldn't be surprised by such acts like what we are seeing currently playing out in Iran?
Well, what Donald Trump as the president of the United States has done is quite typical of America, because America is in need of billions of barrels of oil per year, something like 7 billion liters of oil per year. And they are not prone to buying oil. They are prone to taking it. Now, Iran is number 3 globally in terms of oil reserves. Something like 208 billion oil reserves that are stuck in Iran. That is why we're going to be told that Iran is evil. We're going to be told that Iran has atomic bombs. And then we ask yourself a simple question. If they have atomic bombs, why are they under fire for a week and a half now? Why they haven't used the atomic bomb? Because these are evil people. It's a lie. We have had the same lie again in Iraq. We had the same lie in Afghanistan, the same lie in Libya, and I can count until this program finishes, if not until tomorrow. That's what America is made up. It's made up of big men with big lies and big tummies. And the rest of the world does not qualify to have atomic bombs. Only America and the other 4 friends in Europe and China. You tell me a simple question. If America can hold atomic bombs, what makes it so special? Why can't any other person do so? So it is a sad moment in that it is the civilians, women and children, who are going to suffer the consequences of greed of America, which up to so far, we haven't seen a condemnation from the G7. We haven't seen the condemnation of the US actions from the G20. And it's quite concerning that we will continue to see the visuals on our television screens of the devastation used by America telling the whole world lies so that they can profit, because that's what that state is about. It's about profiting.
I mean, Musa, we've seen the retaliation of Iran to Israel since about April last year. And now Donald Trump has come out and saying that he's warning Tehran against retaliation and saying that it would face more devastation and attacks if they don't agree to peace. What do you think that retaliation by Iran to the US would look like, and what impact would it have on the citizens of the United States of America?
Well, the retaliation by the Iranians could look like the form of attacking, of course, US bases in the region. There are about 40,000 US servicemen who are in the region currently. That could be a major shift. Of course, they could use what the Americans have called the Iranian axis of evil, either Hezbollah, but unfortunately Hezbollah at this point for the Iranians is out, given the attacks by the Israeli in Lebanon that have really reduced the numbers of the Hezbollah that can come out in support for Iran. There are, of course, the Houthis in Yemen. That's another approach that Iran could use, where they could use the Houthis to block US access and other countries accessing the Strait of Hormuz, which is quite important as a trading area. And so in many ways, we could see oil prices increase for us in South Africa. That means inflationary pressure for us. But of course, the Americans, of course, can make this a back and forth. It will be interesting to see really if the Iranians really have the political muscle to respond in a manner that is effective. If there is something that I would add to Mr. Mncube's point, especially on US strategy about intervening in the Middle East. It's not just, I think, about the accessing of America's access to oil in the Middle East, which I think is important, but also US strategies about dealing with the access of other emerging powers to that oil. So the likes of China, the likes of Russia, who continue to try and challenge US hegemony in global affairs. And so for the United States, it is in fact this, I think, this secondary goal that is quite critical, because let's not forget, you have Putin on the other side dealing with Ukraine. And so if we were to look at the Putin-Ukraine matter, we are to look at China in the Pacific and how it's sort of encircling Taiwan as well. I think Trump is also sending a message to the Chinese that if you would press us on a matter as critical as this in protecting Taiwan, we will be agitated to move. And so for Trump, I think Iran is the tester, but whether it's a tester that will go well, that's the question. This might be Iraq 2.0. That's just my view.
All right, let's hold it there. We are continuing our discussion with regards to the top stories of the week, speaking about Iran and Israel and how the U.S. has now entered itself into that discussion. You can send us an email, or rather you can send us a WhatsApp or give us a call on 010-594-6010. Send us a WhatsApp on 072-11055. Welcome back. You're still watching News Feed PM, the late edition, and we continue our panel discussion on the top stories of the week. So, gentlemen, we saw this week Floyd Shivambu holding that press briefing. Thobani, perhaps maybe we could get reaction from you first. What was your take in him having that media briefing? Was that a sign of him exiting now the Umkhonto weSizwe party, him being that seventh or rather sixth former SG of the party?
I think the first thing is that Floyd is out of the MK. I mean, and Floyd, I think for him it was a statement. I mean, what we could have expected on that day, I think he could have just saved the time of South Africa and announced that he has started a political party and maybe start that process. But of course, I mean, he's trying to follow what many could call an organic way of building political organization. I think the same strategy was effected when they started the EFF with Julius Malema 11 years ago, of trying to do a consultative process of some sort. But we know for some of the things that he's been posting that the decision to start a new political party has been taken. It is a matter of seeing how much then that idea resonates with the people of South Africa. But the thing, I think one of the disappointments for me with from what Floyd has been saying is that many of politicians in the country, and Floyd in particular, maybe in this case, do not give us a critique of South Africa's political landscape and the political players that are there and what is wrong about what is existing. So that the idea of even to try and imagine a new political vehicle could be planted from the basis that they have done a thorough analysis of the political organizations that are there. Now, most of the time, these exercises is just about ego politics where everyone wants to lead. Because the question that must be asked for Freud to say, if he is a Marxist-Leninist and he believes in socialism, in the South African political landscape, in the organization that claims to believe in the things that he believes in, is there no organization that he can join to strengthen so that it becomes what he possibly wants? But that is not even a possibility in his thinking. And this big three-centric analysis of politics that says, no, I can't join the EFF because it's a cult, I can't join the ANC because of whatever misdirection that it has, and of course MK, I've got problems because I'm effectively removed as an SG, because there is not expelled, it's been like, then there are more than 40 political parties that exist in South Africa. So you can't then do an analysis on just the two big top three. But it's because most of the time our leaders, it is about their egos. And also there are critical questions that were asked of him, of his own introspection that I think he should have done in terms of the actions that he has taken, how he has behaved, how he relates to other comrades, and on all these accusations of aloofness, of an inflated ego and what to call. But I don't think that Floyd does that. He's much more interested in saying, he wants to start a political party. But if he continues to behave in the same ways that many people have been complaining about him, whether or not he starts a new political party does not change anything. That project may as well fail. Not fail because it has wrong ideas, but fail because the actions that he has not himself critiqued himself and the role that he has played in the EFF and now in the MK. I think what needs to be done in South Africa, there must be a much more better analysis of our political situation from those who claim to want to lead us. But what we are currently doing is just to try and help inflate our egos, and all of us, we want to be called presidents and secretary generals. And in that case, what he has been preaching for the past 10 months since he joined MKP, this idea of black unity or black solidarity. Now, the question that must be asked is that when he forms a new political party, what happens to that black unity? What happens to the continuous dividing of the black bloc or the black vote? Those are the questions that Floyd must be asked. And I don't think that presser, he answered those questions.
Bhekisisa, do you hold the same view that many of our politicians are not doing enough self-introspection? And maybe just to take one up, then what does that do in terms of the perception that those who follow certain politicians and their ideologies, what it does for that electorate then moving forward when someone like Floyd, who then says, should I be forming my own political party, when like Thobani is saying that there are many other options still there, why does he not plug himself and possibly expand on those?
Yes, Floyd Shivambu, as he's normally called in some circles, is a total failure as a politician. I wrote about this the very first week when he ditched his home in the EFF for the wilderness in the Umkhonto we-Sizwe Party, something that really is held together by a mixtape, you know. And we all know it doesn't have a future. We all know that it's dependent on the health of the leader, the one who achieves nothing and says he's going to tell us all the secrets, and he never does. So it was quite clear from the beginning that this was the beginning and of the end of Shivambu's political career. And it came faster than I had predicted. And this idea of starting a new political party, he should speak to the guy who started Rise and Mzansi. He had the funding, he had the think tank behind him, he had all the resources you can think of. Campaigned in the whole country for 2 years, I think, and ended up with how many seats in parliament? We all know the numbers, right? So the political landscape is like it's a stampede. There's no point on anyone starting a new political party. And also, he lacks something that other politicians have, something that is taken for granted. It's called charisma. Shivambu doesn't have that. And then he lacks the oratory, you know. The optics are not right. He stood up there alone and for about 4 minutes, he was just counting the regions and districts he's going to be visiting in South Africa. So clearly, no one advised him what you do when you're on live television in terms of the key messaging. What we found there was a Zuma script. I remain a member of the MKP, but I'm starting a new political party. I mean, it's a waste of time for all South Africans. And I think we should just really focus on things that, we know, the bread and butter issues that face South Africans every day, the cost of living crisis, you know, the issues of unemployment. Shivambu and others can really take a backseat.
So, well, I mean, Musa, I don't know what's your take in the MK party being headed for nowhere and solely dependent on the health of its leader. Do you think there's no hope for those that especially have jumped ship from parties like the EFF to the MK party?
Yeah, look, I think I agree with both gentlemen here, you know, and particularly when Thobani speaks about this issue of leaders not doing the proper analysis, really about their own part in history, in the South African moment. And I think we generally have a failure in that. A lot of the times, even when you look at interviews, even with Floyd's interview, a lot of the times blame is pinned to somebody else. There is this boogeyman, this tokolos, that is waiting to remove me from political power, when in actual fact, you are the tokolos that we need to look at. Because in many ways, you're the one who has made political mistakes that a proper political operator would not have done. He should have analyzed, as Thobani has so put it well, his moment in the EFF. Why did it all of a sudden not work well? Because the big question for me, Sis Katlego, has been, he has never really answered the question, why Jacob Zuma? Why go back to the man who, for all intents and purposes, is the cause of your exit from the ANC? And a man who has been, for 10 years or so, the prime boogeyman of your political existence as the EFF. And all of a sudden, you then tell us on national TV, I have learned more things from Jacob Zuma than I have as deputy president of the EFF. Come on, give me a break. As Mncube said, we have better things to focus on. I think we rather focus on the South African economy. We rather focus on the upcoming G20. We rather really focus on issues that are bread and butter matters. Or Floyd really will be yesterday's news.
Well, I see Bhekisisa laughing there when you're saying, brother, we have other things to focus on. Speaking about focusing on other things, we speak of now Julius Malema, who has been denied access to the UK. And the UK is simply saying that his presence is not conducive to the public good and that his political views are not of those that they would want to be expressed in that region. Thobani, what's your take on this and him saying that he's obviously not going to change his political views, and these political views, of course, are in relation to the genocide of the Palestinian people, as well as the racial inequality that exists in South Africa?
I think maybe the first thing is that, I mean, the United Kingdom is consistent in its politics of being an ally of Israel, and of course opposing anything that seeks to threaten its interest and its political view and political standing in the world. Continues, of course, as a madam imperial country, or the former a colonizer, right? But on the other side, continues, I mean, in its frame of defense of the white supremacist project of the world. If you read their reasons and what they quote for their reasons to stop Julius from for getting a visa in the UK, they cite what he has said about white people. They cite his position on Israel and his continued support of Hamas and Hezbollah. All of these things are consistent with UK politics of saying that the UK supports the state of Israel, has designated Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist organizations, has no problem with Israel and the bombing of Gaza and the killing of the people of Gaza, but has a problem with Hamas and Hezbollah. This is the UK. So for me, there is no surprises when the UK decides that it will not want Julius to be in their country, because how dare you allow someone who's going to come and stand in your own country and criticize your very existence as a superpower in the world. And of course, whether or not we agree with Julius or whether or not we believe Julius is consistent and principled on the positions and the politics that he speaks about, but in relation to UK and its stance on him, I think for me, it is justified what the UK is doing, and I'm saying justified in looking at where they stand as a political entity. Julius has no reason to change how he has categorized the Israeli state and other organizations. Has no reason to do so, and has no reason to be able to be made to compromise solely on the basis that he wants to travel and get on a plane and be in the UK. I don't think that's how our leaders should be operating. But we should not be surprised about the position of the UK, in particular in issues of Israel and what you call it. This is consistent with what they've done for many years. And I think for me, of course we can discuss that Julius does, but it's an issue that Julius we need to just move on. It's going to happen. Some countries are not going to want you in. We move on. We've got far more, as Musa was saying, in this country, we've got far more important issues to discuss than to discuss Floyd and whether or not he wants to start a political party, or to discuss Julius Malema not getting the issues of this country are too serious for us, whether or not Julius is going to be able to be on British Airways or go to London. So for me, maybe I would stop there for now.
Yes, let's certainly stop there for now. Let's hold the gentleman as we will continue our discussion when we come back from the break. You can continue sending us your WhatsApps as well as your calls on 010-594-6010. And you can WhatsApp us on 072-110-5584. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue our discussion in wrapping up the top stories of the week with our analysts Musa Mdunge, Thobani Zikalala, as well as columnist Bhekisisa Mncube. So, gentlemen, before the break, we were still speaking about Julius Malema and the visa that had been denied to him in going to the UK. Bhekisisa, perhaps let's bring you in there. Thobani speaks about the UK being consistent in its politics. But maybe if we just broaden it and we look at the relation between the UK and South Africa and then those differing views of the racial tensions that exist in South Africa, the genocide that exists in Palestine. What does that tell us about the relations between the two countries with such differing views?
It tells us the story that colonialism hasn't ended. We are expected to kowtow to an imperial power, so that before I sleep, I must think what the British people are thinking, the British government is thinking, and I must align my thinking with the British government. The same people who plundered, raped, and stole our minerals in this country, and they continue to do so now in the name of trade. I mean, it's astonishing. I mean, Julius has a right, a freedom of expression. He can say whatever that he so desire to say, in line with our constitution. The bloody British can't even put together a constitution. Do they have a constitution? They have a monarchy. But we can't honor our own kings and queens in this country without being looked at as if we are backward by continuing with our own heritage. The British can do their own, continue their own heritage. The British can have friends in Israel. We can't have friends anywhere else. We must ask them who should be our friend. I mean, it's an insult to a sovereign state like South Africa. We fought for our freedom. It wasn't handed over to us. And when we did so, Britain and America, coincidence, they were not in support. I'm talking about at a political level. Obviously, the people of the UK and the people of the America were doing a lot in the background and even convinced the Congress in the US to actually sanction South Africa. But they went against their own president. That's how the political establishment in these countries that continue to plunder the resources of Africa and Asia, they have given themselves this extraordinary power to police the thinking, the actions, and any movement of an African. Or not, the darker the skin, we are in big trouble. No one watches the same television that I do, and I see the faces of those children that are already covered on live television in Gaza. No one is moved because they lack humanity. You know, one of the things that we are so-called not successful as Africa is because we have humanity, because we think about the life of the other, because we live to benefit society, not for greed. So, I mean, really, Britain must think broader than fearing Julius Malema. In this country, Julius is what, number 7 in terms of our problems that we have? He's not a problem. He's just a politician who has a particular point of view. And he must be allowed to hold that. He can't be told by an imperial power what kind of politics he must have. Otherwise, we must not exist as a state, of which we are recognized by the United Nations. So what gives Britain the right to determine who must be what? If they want to take this further, then they must issue an advisory to the British people, telling them not to come to South Africa. And they will see a revolt in 1 week. Because those Europeans want our sun here in Africa. They want our Kruger National Park. Let them issue an advisory to their citizens and say, do not go to South Africa. Then you'll see a revolt. There will be no nice life there in Whiskies in London.
So Musa, I mean, just on that point of Bhekisisa and him just talking about how colonialism continues to exist globally and would affect us as South Africans, don't you think this is an opportune time for parties which you would think would have aligned ideologies such as the ANC, the EFF and the MK party to find places to unite in instances such as this?
I like the fact, Zikalala, that you framed it as ANC, MK, and EFF, because having done a couple of interviews, I keep getting this pattern where there's an assumption that ANC and MK and EFF are one thing, and I would hold the opposite argument and actually argue that in actual fact the ANC and DA are closer ideologically than in actual fact the MK and ANC. Why do I argue that? 30 years of democracy, we have seen a ANC talk left, but policy right. There's never been a difference between the DA and ANC in terms of policy positions. It's why with the limited time that the Constitution allowed them to come together and form government, they were able to do that. And speaking of the GNU and why I bring this in this conversation is because I think the British position has to do with two things. One, to appease their American overlords over in Washington, D.C. That is one. But two, to also control the South African so-called political power to make them understand that Julius Malema is persona non grata to the Britain. Therefore, don't even think in future GNU conversations of including him. We all know that 2027 is coming up. We all know where Paul Mashatile sits on certain matters. We know that he's irking to bring in an MK and an EFF into government. Could this have been the British warning to that camp in the ANC not to move that way? We've got to see things beyond just simple a denial here. It is also about the attempt by the British to frame South African politics, how we as South Africans must choose which path we want to choose, in the same way that they're allowed to choose their partners. The fact that the UK would deny Julius Malema is a huge indictment for a country that proposes that it is one of the oldest democracies, when in actual fact, I would argue that we best them in that department, for we are a constitutional democracy where they believe in parliamentary sovereignty. So no wonder they take the positions that they do. Our constitutional court has framed and protected the singing of Kill the Boers and has given a legal context in which it must be understood. And the British understand that position. It's simple, Zikalala. It's a matter of you have a Labour Prime Minister and you have a Republican President. And because on ideology, these two don't sing along. There's an over attempt by the British always, even if Tony Blair was the same, to appease the conservatives in America. And we're seeing the very same thing play out. This time, it's just Julius Malema.
All right, we do have a call. We have Lenong from Pretoria. Lenong, a very good evening to you. What's your question or comment this evening?
How are you, ma'am?
Good, thanks, and thank you for joining us.
I'm all right, ma'am. No, I just want to comment about the Floyd Shivambu. You know, when I look at Floyd Shivambu, I think he is the end of his political future. How can you call a conference, instead of talking about the MKP, you talk about the EFF and the ANC? Floyd is supposed to tell us what happened inside the MKP. Because, look, the first one, they just cut his position of Secretary General. Why not telling us about what happened there instead of saying EFF is a cult and ANC this and that? For me, I see the end of political future for Floyd Shivambu. He must look at himself. He must do the introspection about himself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lenong from Pretoria. Gentlemen, of course, Lenong seemingly agreeing with you with regards to Floyd now being the one who's ending his political career. We do have some WhatsApps that have come through. There's one from Mlondolozi saying, "Hi, Trump deserves a war as he attracted it. South Africa needs to keep quiet on this." The next WhatsApp that we have All right, it doesn't seem as though we've got more WhatsApps. Oh, there's Kenny Sibalo saying, you see, politicians like Abu Shivambu, they don't need to be led or follow other leaders. He is in a hurry to form a political party. Another one from Goodwill Jane in Limpopo says, good evening, Katlego. Floyd is an intelligent politician. He made clever moves. You can listen to his processes of preparing a new party. He's very organized. Okay, so that was our last WhatsApp, gentlemen. Some of them, they're agreeing with you, and others not, saying Floyd is quite strategic and organized, and maybe we should be looking out for his next move. I just want to quickly touch on the burial of the former Zambian president. We've got a few minutes, and I just want to get your views. Perhaps, Bhekisisa, we can start with you. The first former statesman to be buried on South African soil. What's your take on this, and what does this mean for the people of Zambia?
It's a bit sad when I read the story about 2 days ago, but it actually talks to something broader. How many puppet governments do we have in Africa? Because that's where our problems as a continent are. You know, the people, we're not a poor continent. We have resources here, we have skills, we have educated people, we have all sorts of things we can think of. But we're not prosperous as a continent because of the puppet states that have been installed by America in the West. Now you have this situation where
all right, it seems as though we've lost connection to Bhekisisa. Perhaps, Thobani, you can pick up on that with your views of former President Lungu being buried in South Africa, and just that impasse between his family and the Zambian government.
I think it's a very surprising thing, because we may have expected, and of course, generally people would expect that when someone dies, they would want to go home, or the family would want to take them home. But in the issue of Edgar Lungu being buried in South Africa rather than in Zambia, must look at it in relation to his political history, and of course with the current state in Zambia today, because I think those tensions and in the fact that his family is now in South Africa and things like that is as a result of the past 4 or 5 years since this current president came into power, and how he has been treated and hounded by them. Now, it may be a political decision by the family to say the Zambian state does not deserve to honor Edgar Lungu, especially the current president, whom, when Edgar Lungu was still alive, did not honor him or treat him like a former president. I don't know if that makes sense. So say, if you give him a state funeral when he's gone, but this is the same man who you believed that was corrupt, his family, we founded his family, prosecuted his family and things like that. When he passes away, we are saying, I know, now let us have a national week of mourning, let's have a state funeral, and. So I think for me, this is a much more of a political statement being made by the family, rather than just a simple decision of burying your loved one in a different country.
Africa.
I think they are making a political statement.
Most
and
certainly.
I think even though it is unusual, but it may be a plausible political statement that they're making.
Musa, we need to wrap, just 30 seconds in getting your thoughts on this, please.
It is an interesting matter, one that poses a diplomatic headache for the South African government. But of course, my advice to the South African government would be to try and intervene and negotiate between the family and the Zimbabwean state, because I would imagine that it would cause some sort of a diplomatic tax